right, without any further ado, I want to introduce Philip Johnston. We've had him twice before. His first talk was on the film The Tree of Life, and did an excellent talk with a lot of good slides. He always brings slides. Are these colored tonight as well?
Indeed.
Indeed, color. Not just these black and white, but color. And he gave a talk last time on introverts and extroverts. I should know that score. Introverts and extroverts, and what we can do to help each other. More how extroverts can help introverts. But anyway, those two talks are podcasted on our site, so you can go get them, download them, listen to them.
You need to do the sequel to that.
As the extrovert,
yeah.
What introverts can do for me. I've got it. Remind me, I'll do it next term. I'm sure they're dying to hear that. But Philip Johnston, I wasn't going to do an event in January, because we had a big campaign and we tried to raise a lot of money, and we were successful at raising a substantial amount of cash by the end of the year, put us in really good shape. We're really grateful for people who helped with that. And I was like, I don't want to do anything in January. We did a concert in December too. But lo and behold, Mr. Johnston emails me and says, hey, I'm going to be around, I'd like to do a talk on this subject. I said, sounds great. Because I've been wanting to do something on this very idea of being bored and being snowed in the winter and not knowing what to do with yourself, and how the depression fits into that. And what do you do in January anyway? So he was my answer. So, no, not the farm show. That's too sneezy to go to the farm show. But Philip Johnston is a seminary student. He's doing his graduate work in theology at my alma mater, Covenant Theological Seminary in St. Louis. He's going to be going into his second, third year, something like that. He has also worked at L'Abri Fellowship, which is a Christian residential study center, which is a really great outreach, and has had a lot of impact on the row house and what we do here. So he can tell you more about himself. He's from Chambersburg. His parents are here. Let's hear it for Philip Johnston.
Okay, good evening, everybody. When Tom made the event on Facebook for this, he said that I raised ferrets only because I posted an article about ferrets the day before. And then he said something about my enduring love for Haas's Steak and Sea House, since I'm from Chambersburg, which stands about as much as my love of ferrets. So hopefully you'll be able to get a picture of what's true about me this evening. Maybe. Who knows? But as Tom said, I've been wanting to think about this title a good bit, and I wanted an excuse to actually think about it in a disciplined way, because I probably wouldn't do it if I wasn't presenting anything, which says a lot about me, probably not all good things, but this is how it works. Hello! I know those people. So I want to start out, does anyone know this face? Okay, this is a guy named Jaron Lanier, and you might not be familiar with him, but you'll know something about him if you've ever played the game Frogger on your Atari. In the 1980s, Lanier worked to design some of the first video games for that company, and then he left it in the early 90s to found his own company called VPL Research Incorporated. And from there, he became a pioneer of virtual reality technology and dreadlocks. And so these virtual reality gloves and these virtual reality goggles are his invention, really. He's a genius. And his heyday of innovation was before the turn of the 21st century, but he's still known as one of the world's most esteemed technological minds and innovators. He's currently a scholar at large for Microsoft Research. Now, being a great lover of technology and technological innovation, there's something you should know about Jaron Lanier. In 2010, he wrote this book entitled You Are Not a Gadget, a Manifesto. And this was a surprising book to come from someone like Jaron Lanier, of his stature and his credentials, and it's a scary book written by a very scared man. And so what he's trying to dig into is something we all know well. We can probably all admit that we know more about each other and we share more about ourselves in this moment in time since the dawn of the personal computer than any other time in history, especially with the rise of social media. And this is what Lanier is looking at in his book. And he is concerned with the way in which technology will always tend to think of human beings and human persons in terms of the information it can know about them. And the problem with that, he says, is that information, no matter how much you have, always underrepresents reality. And he doesn't say that it misrepresents reality, because he of all people should know that it can create its own kind of reality, and information can be a good thing. It can communicate a lot truthfully. But, as the title of his book declares, you are not a gadget. And people, he says, are more complex than any amount of information that you can collect about them. And he is worried that we've begun to think of ourselves only in terms of the information that we can share about ourselves, our favorite music, what we did last night, how we spent our last holiday, our least favorite movies, and those lusty Instagrammed pictures of your last meal on the town. And so in the introduction of his book, he says, it's early in the 21st century, and that means that these words will mostly be read by non-persons, automatons or numb mobs composed of people who are no longer acting as individuals. He notes that as many times as his book will be quote-unquote read, it will mostly be read by machines and internet search engines. And what he says is that it is you, the person, the rarity among my readers, who I hope to reach. The words in this book are written for people, not computers. I want to say, you have to be somebody before you can share yourself. So that's kind of the big idea behind my talk this evening. And if you just write that down in your notes and don't write anything else, that's perfectly fine. So, the title of the talk this evening, as you saw earlier, is Bored Yet Busy, What to Do About Free Time, the Winter Blues, and Lack of Purpose. Boredom and busyness might seem like two unrelated things. How can you be bored and also be busy simultaneously? But I think it's very possible, especially in an increasingly technological society. So if Jaron Lanier is right that we have to be somebody before we can share ourselves, I think boredom and I also think busyness and the way in which the two intersect are the primary culprits that we should be aware of, or at least two of the primary culprits. There are many more. And I think these are things that are stealing ourselves from us day by day. And there are certainly more, but in this talk I just want to take these two out for a spin. So if you'll indulge me for around half an hour, we'll see what we can do. So this is my outline for the evening, and we're going to start with boredom. Around 6 years ago this time, I was in Richmond, Virginia, making a movie with some friends that some of you, sadly, in this room have seen. The title of the film was called, brilliantly so, A Pistol in Hand is Worth Two in the Glove Box. We knew we were very clever. And we called ourselves the Ivory Film Company, and this was our premiere venture. And with a huge budget of $2,500, we were mounting a project of magnificent importance, at least to us. And the screenplay was a fusion of Jean-Luc Godard's Breathless and Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. And it would show the world that we didn't really know what it would show the world, but whatever it was very, very, very important. So the film was written by a quiet and laconic English major who, in addition to Breathless, had just recently discovered his kind of primal kinship with the French poet Charles Baudelaire. This guy wrote the script in the darkness of his dorm room on his typewriter. He was a happy sort of person. And the film began with a snatch of Baudelaire's poetry, and it was a kind of riddle for which the poet gives an answer come the end. So the poet says, and I quote, "Amongst the jackals, leopards, mongrels, apes, snakes, scorpions, vultures, that with hellish din squeal, roar, writhe, gambol, crawl, with monstrous shapes in each man's foul menagerie of sin," foul dorm room of sin, "there's one more damned than all, He never gambles, nor crawls, nor roars, but from the rest withdrawn, gladly of this whole earth would make a shambles, and swallow up existence with a yawn. So, what is this dire sickness that Baudelaire describes? This thing that is filthier than scorpions and vultures and more malicious than any monster? It was our film. No. So, our movie followed 2 days in the purposeless lives of a romantically involved young man and young woman. And so, in the film, one unfortunate day, the young woman murders a police officer who has pulled them over for speeding, and the lovers flee the scene for a hedonistic party at their friend Butch's house. But that's the hedonistic party. And the unexpectedness of the lingering guilt catches up to the heroine. And as the film closes, she runs into the woods and attempts suicide just before the authorities catch up to them. And the last words on her mouth as she dies in her lover's arms are the answer to Baudelaire's riddle from the poem. C'est ennui, she says in French. It is boredom. So this film was very, very existentially important. But even more important than our film, Charles Baudelaire thought boredom was the great sickness of his age. And in his terms, he said, it was capable of wholly vaporizing the noble metal of a person's will, making their sins more obstinate and their repentance more faint. Boredom would cause our souls to lose all their boldness, he said. It would cause humanity to step further and further toward hell without ever noticing that they were taking any steps. Now, these are dramatic descriptions for sure, but is boredom really as dangerous as Baudelaire declares in his poem? I think that it can be, but it depends on what kind of boredom we're talking about. We have to first recognize that boredom, as Baudelaire describes it in his poem, is not simply a lack of stimulation or not having anything to do. In fact, we could probably use more of those things in our lives right now. We need rest and recreation like we need sleep and like we need food. They're utterly necessary for us, and they're intentional departures from our normal routine that are meant to bring us to a place where we are more capable of doing things well. Rest and recreation serve as kind of a protection for the various callings that we have, and often have the effect, when used rightly, of stimulating the gifts that we have so that we can do them better. Boredom is totally different. It's another matter. It's neither restful nor is it recreative. So for the purposes of this talk, I'm going to work with this definition of boredom, which I made up, which means it's probably too long. But boredom is aimless wandering of mind and or body that inhibits our ability to make something of the world and results in increased purposelessness rather than restoration of purpose. So defined this way, boredom manifests itself in many, many different ways in different times and places. Down through the ages, it has affected every single kind of person, from monks to rock stars. And the boredom that plagued Baudelaire and his compatriots in the absinthe bars of 19th century France is brought upon us through different mediums, obviously, since we don't have access to absinthe. So this brings me back to where I was speaking at the beginning about Jaron Lanier and technology. If we define boredom like this, as aimless wandering of mind and or body that inhibits our ability to make something of the world and results in increased purposelessness rather than restoration of purpose, I promise I won't say all that again, I'm drawn to thinking of what many of us do when the initial aimless wandering of boredom first hits us now in the 21st century. And from my experience, we go online. Either for minutes or for hours. We open up Pinterest or BuzzFeed or Twitter or Facebook or something like that, and we soon forget what we were aiming to do in the first place before the initial onset of boredom. So this way of satiating our boredom initially can itself become boredom. Has anyone noticed this constant kind of engagement of technology? So for some, this looks like it can look like constant evenings of television marathons where you watch 8 episodes of Friends on Netflix without realizing how many you've watched, or you've just watched 8 episodes of The Mindy Project on Hulu, passing by without notice at all. And for some, these hours can be spent watching pornographic images, even, which are unrealistic pictures that give us unrealistic expectations for relationship. But for others, this boredom can dawn because our smartphones, which are so much a part of us, have fused with ourselves instead of becoming an extension of ourself, which is what they're meant to be. So they can always occupy our attention because they are part of us, and we never find anything truly satisfying when we use them. I think many more examples of this could be given. And the thing that first inspired me to think about this was an article I read in the New Yorker from October by a guy named Evgeny Morozov. And he has coined a term for this phenomenon, and he calls it mediated boredom. Mm-hmm. And he says that, through reading him, I came up with this definition with his help, of course. Mediated boredom is boredom brought about through information overload, often from a digital source, that produces a cyclical craving for more information in order to suppress that craving. So it does not provide time to think. It just produces a craving for more information in order to suppress it and start going around again and again. Have you noticed this vicious cycle that can happen when we spend a lot of time with technology? This craving for information that must be suppressed, but sure enough rises up again. This is the cycle of mediated boredom. And if you notice, it's also one of the most basic patterns of addiction. As anyone who knows an addict or has been one will realize, and this promise of information that will suppress the craving and yet provide a new one, it always overpromises and underdelivers in what it sets out to do for you. And this guy, Evgeny Morozov, says that we often fail to notice how very entrenched we are in mediated boredom because it cloaks itself in the rhetoric of nowness and newness. It's now, it's new, you have to see it. It provides the illusion that we're on top of everything. This is the latest update, the latest game, the latest episode, the latest news from home and abroad. And we think that all these things are keeping us current, which they are in some ways. But after an hour, or even 15 minutes, of mediated boredom, when the information vacuum finally spits us out, it is often the case that we are more needy, we feel depleted, and we might even feel more purposeless than we ever did when we started. I'm talking from my own life in these experiences, so I don't know if anyone else has experienced this too, but it seems awfully common. So it makes me ask, are we aware of what we run to when boredom hits us? Of these habits we have required for coping with it? Do we remember what we did when boredom hit before the internet was such a huge part of our lives and at our fingertips? And is all the information we send and receive enriching us as people who can share something of value with the world? Because, as Jaron Lanier says, you have to be somebody before you can share yourself. So is constant connectivity giving us selves worth sharing? Or is it actually depleting our sense of self and our ability to make something of the world? So on top of these different kinds of boredom, the problem of busyness also presents itself to me. And I got to thinking about this in June of 2010 when Tim Kreider in the New York Times, he's a political cartoonist, he wrote an article called The Busy Trap that went viral. And he's a very lively writer, so I'm just going to read the first few lines of his essay. He says, if you live in America in the 21st century, you've probably had to listen to a lot of people tell you how busy they are. It's become the default response when you ask anyone how they're doing. Busy, so busy, crazy busy. It is pretty obviously a boast disguised as a complaint. And the stock response is a kind of congratulation. That's a good problem to have, or better than the opposite. Notice it isn't generally people pulling back-to-back shifts in the ICU or commuting by bus to 3 minimum wage jobs who tell you how busy they are. What those people are is not busy, but tired, exhausted, dead on their feet. It's almost always people whose lamented busyness is purely self-imposed. Work and obligations they've taken on voluntarily, classes and activities they've encouraged their kids to participate in. They're busy because of their own ambition or drive or anxiety, because they're addicted to busyness. Kreider's essay rang true with many people. Who hasn't been met with these responses that he's talking about in the last few years? Everyone is busy, and even kids have packed schedules. There was a cartoon in the New Yorker this week of two kids talking at their lockers, and he says, "Yeah, I'm just so overscheduled. The only free time I have is in timeout." Kids are scheduled with sports and extracurricular activities, and one of this guy, Tim Kreider's conclusions is that this present hysteria of busyness is not a necessary or inevitable condition of our life. It's something we've chosen, if only by our acquiescence to it. We've acquiesced to being busy, he says, because we feel intensely empty when we are not busy. Now, I don't know if you've experienced that. It may or may not be true for you, but if there is one surprising trend that I've noticed over the last few years, it's that people are increasingly turning to technology and social media to stave off loneliness and emptiness. Something like Facebook began as a novelty and soon became a habit. For many, it has become a need, and for many, it is now an addiction. And often, instead of delivering on those promises to relieve loneliness and emptiness, something like Facebook creates in us a need for information or online contact only to suppress that craving until a new one comes up. That exhausting cycle of mediated boredom, which I just talked about a few seconds ago. So the internet provides us with endless opportunities, I've come to think. Endless opportunities to overcommit ourselves to mindless things. And is this not why we always respond so busy, that we're so busy because we've made room for all these things in our lives and overcommitted ourselves to them? It could be true that we've overcommitted ourselves to good things as well, but that's another talk, or for the Q&A. Now, a really good illustration of this is in Dave Eggers' new novel, The Circle. Has anyone read this? It is a book about a social media company called The Circle, and all the employees at The Circle spend their days surrounded by hundreds of screens, giving them a constant flow of trivial information, but they still insist on more and more and ratcheting up this level of information that they send and receive. And one character named May works at The Circle, but her boyfriend Mercer is a craftsman. He handcrafts as many chandeliers as he gets orders for. He works with his hands. And one evening, May complains to Mercer that he is not sufficiently connected online. And she condemns him for not being social enough. And his response to her is this. He says, "It's not that I'm not social. I'm social enough. But the tools you guys create at The Circle actually manufacture unnaturally extreme social needs. No one needs the level of contact you're purveying. It improves nothing. It's not nourishing. It's like snack food. You know how they engineer this food? They scientifically determine precisely how much salt and fat they need to include to keep you eating. You're not hungry. You don't need the food. It does nothing for you, but you keep eating those empty calories. This is what you're pushing. Same thing. Endless empty calories, but the digital social equivalent. And you calibrate it so it's equally addictive. You know how you finish a bag of chips and you hate yourself? You know you've done nothing good for yourself. That's the same feeling, and you know it is, after some digital binge. You feel wasted and hollow and diminished." So after your significant other gives you a speech like that, May gets frustrated by the conversation and retreats to her room, where she logs on to her Circle account and attends to her many online duties that she has committed herself to. There is nothing inherently wrong with the concept of social media. I use social media as well. And there's nothing wrong with news sites or an occasional visit to YouTube. But I'm convinced that many of us feel so busy in this current cultural moment because, as Mercer said to his girlfriend, the many facets of our digital lives that we have committed ourselves to have manufactured these unnaturally extreme social needs in us. Many of us feel as if we must make room for this constant stream of information into our daily lives. And when we place ourselves before them daily, we often end up in that spin cycle of mediated boredom that spits us out in a state of exhaustion sometimes in a state of increased neediness, and for many, sadly right now, a state of profound depression. So perhaps at the beginning of this year, a year that will be as filled with the last one or even more, with technological innovation and opportunities to share ourselves and peer into the lives of others, perhaps we need to take stock of where we have committed ourselves and move towards some kind of change. And I'd like to look at that from two different directions this evening, under the headings of doing and seeing. So there have been a number of books and studies published in the last few years about how our overcommitment to internet technology and our addiction to busyness is affecting us culturally. And one of the first, and still one of the best, which many of you have probably seen, is Nicholas Carr's 2010 book, The Shallows, What the Internet is Doing to Our Brains. The Shallows cause many people to think about how technology has affected their ability to actually process information and concentrate on everything from reading a book to tasks that require intensive focus on their part. And people are realizing that they're losing this ability to focus on tasks and to sit down with a book for any amount of time. And these are people who haven't struggled with things like attention deficit or something like that. Many other books detailing discoveries in neuroscience have increasingly validated the things that Nicholas Carr said in the book, and his main idea was that the internet is chipping away our capacity for concentration and contemplation, and consistently making us expect to take in information the way the net distributes it, in a swiftly moving stream of particles. We can't handle much more. So because of how swiftly this stream of information particles moves, we are constantly distracted from one thing by another. And this is the problem addressed in a new book called The Distraction Addiction, which is, the subtitle is Getting the Information You Need and the Communication You Want Without Enraging Your Family, Annoying Your Colleagues, and Destroying Your Soul. It's a high goals for this book. So the author attempts to provide resources for combating distraction through the practice of what he very creatively calls contemplative computing, which he says will enable his readers to approach information technologies in a way that is mindful and nearly effortless, and that contributes to our ability to focus, be creative, and be happy. Now, one of the best parts of this book for me was in the beginning he takes his readers through two different Monday morning scenarios, which I'm going to go through real quickly here. He says the first Monday begins and you wake up to the sound of your cell phone and you automatically open your email app to find 19 emails sent during the night, mostly automated ones from advertisers, but some from colleagues or from social media. You answer one, you start another, you realize that you're not sure what to say, so you flip through your web browser and check the news and you think you'll finish the message later. Suddenly, without realizing it, 20 minutes have passed under your covers, and you don't know what you were doing in the first place and who you were corresponding with. You get to the office finally, and there's a mountainous pile of information that you have to deal with, but you're constantly interrupted by new emails from colleagues coming in all the time. Even your interruptions are being interrupted. And each interruption brings with it the need to remember what it was you were doing before you were interrupted the first time. So by the time the afternoon rolls around, you're ready to print out your day's work and hand it over to the boss. But the printer isn't working and needs a new driver. You spend half an hour fixing it, and you hand in your work. After work, you go out with some friends for a drink or for dinner, and you see numerous people glued to their phones while walking, and suddenly you feel a buzz in your pocket. And you think it's your phone, but you reach down and your phone's not there. It was a phantom tremor. Certainly people have experienced this. And you actually find your phone in your jacket pocket in a totally different place. During dinner, you and your friend intermittently have to say, "Oh, I'm sorry, what did you say?" to each other, because you are responding to some lingering things from work that you have to take care of. And as you're doing this, you get this garbled text from your ex who lives in another time zone where it's the middle of the night. Your friend tells you that it's probably the result of sleep texting, which is a real thing and happens to many, many people. So that's your first Monday. And now, if you do what Alex Pang says in this book, this will be your next Monday. You wake up in the morning and you turn off the alarm on your smartphone and you don't check your email. That can wait until you get to work. And even then, it's not so bad because you've unsubscribed to many of the noisy newsletters which you delete anyway. You're okay with not getting to your email right away because you've decided that on Saturday night, your cell phone would get stored in a drawer until Sunday night. And in that time, you and a group of friends have decided to do intensely analog things with each other. Things that you find doing these things that you've had more time to read and more time to cook and more time to spend with your friends. When you get to work, your head is down, you hit the books. And you realize that a frantic request from a coworker is not the same as a high priority request. And you know how to differentiate between these things. You also shut off your phone and you've installed a program on your computer that blocks internet access for a certain amount of time, perhaps 2 hours. And when the time is up, you're amazed at the amount of work that you've been able to accomplish. When you get home, you allow yourself half an hour of social media. And after all, do you really need more than that? Your aim is not to get noticed or to accumulate lots of followers. Instead, being online is about connecting meaningfully with people, about conserving your own attention so you're not constantly distracted all the time, and about respecting your friends' minds, not about killing time, an awful phrase, or engaging with media for its own sake. These are all his suggestions from this book. Now, the differences between these Monday mornings are pronounced and exaggerated. The first Monday is an exhausting day where internet technology is not simply a part of a person's daily life, but it's a part of their daily minute. And the difference this contemplative computing can make makes the other Monday one where technology is an extension of yourself. It's enabling you to accomplish more things, and it's not becoming absorbed into you. Because you have to be somebody before you can share yourself. And this boredom and this busyness, I think, is taking these things away from us and distracting us from becoming people worth sharing. So while reading The Distraction Addiction, I found myself constantly chuckling at it because he's putting out these basic things as if they were utterly groundbreaking. Like this idea of Sabbath. Yeah, these people called the Jews have been doing it for thousands of years and they say it's really great. And all kinds of things like that. But, as culture changes and things that were once novelties become habits and even addictions, we need to be reminded of these things. So, at the end of the book, he gives some suggestions, and I'm going to show you 4 of them, and I've enhanced them with a few questions, kind of diagnostic questions to help us along, perhaps in our recovery from having a distracted mind. So, suggestion number 1, be human. Technology is an irrevocable part of our modern lives. But have you taken stock of the way technology has affected the way that you view yourself or other people? Are you consistently viewing yourself or other people through that lens instead of through your own eyes? Have you begun to look at people in terms of the information that you know about them rather than a personal encounter with them? In the words of Martin Buber, are you seeing people as an I-it encounter? Are you seeing people as it's the information that you know about them? Or are you encountering them as another person, as a you? So that is the first suggestion, he says. The second is to be mindful. Why are you getting online? Or even deeper, why are you clicking? Are you clicking because you are jealous, angry, hateful, fearful? Are these emotions enabling you to become a more fully human person who can share themselves? Is that next click contributing to you becoming a person worth sharing with other people? Be engaged. Is the way you are using technology causing you to be more engaged with the world around you, or is it making you timid? and causing you to retreat further into yourself. This will be different if you're an introvert or an extrovert, but we can talk about that some other time. Do you know, and this, I think this is a key question here. Do you know how to have a conversation with another person? Do you know how to ask them good questions to find out more about the person you are talking to? Or do your conversations always feel like interviews with one person asking you all the questions? And the final one, be restored. When you choose to rest, are you leaving yourself open to the things that deplete your energy? Can you see your cell phone or see your computer and your eyes are always drawn to them so that you're reminded of the many things that prevent you from resting? After all, the resting mind can still be distracted. And the solution to this may be as simple as shoving your technology in a drawer for a little while so your eyes are not drawn to them. It seems so simple, but it is utterly life-changing. Your mind needs to be diverted enough from these things to be restored from them. So these are his suggestions. And it's a very helpful, very basic book. But I would like to look at this from a different angle, which is the angle of seeing. At the beginning of the 21st century, the English poet T.S. Eliot observed some of the primary burdens of his society in a familiar passage. They're the opening lines of his choruses from The Rock, with which many of you are probably familiar. He says, "The endless cycle of idea and action, endless invention, endless experiment, brings knowledge of motion, but not of stillness, knowledge of speech, but not of silence, knowledge of words, and ignorance of the word. All our knowledge brings us nearer to our ignorance. All our ignorance brings us nearer to death. But nearness to death, no nearer to God. Where is the life we lost in living? Where is the wisdom we have lost in knowledge? Where is the knowledge we have lost in information? The cycles of heaven in 20 centuries bring us farther from God and nearer to the dust." How might we flee this situation? I've just described some practices that are suggested by many people that we could put into action that would help us conquer what Eliot describes and the problems I've highlighted tonight. But I think an essential part of this recovery process is to realize afresh, or perhaps for the first time, the story that we are a part of. And many people tell themselves the story about how the world works from different angles. So for me, as a Christian, I believe that the true story of the world is the one presented to us in the Hebrew Bible and in the Christian New Testament. It is a grand, sweeping epic in which all of us have been given a part, and one that provides, I think, rich resources for how we approach the problems of boredom and busyness and the way they make us feel. And I'll be looking at this story from a particular angle tonight. The beautiful thing about the Bible is that it's so full of meaning, and we can find so much in it. So the story begins like this. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. The story begins with the creation of all that is by the Creator, God. And for 6 days, God creates a universe that is teeming with life. And after each day of creation, God looks over all He has made and pronounces it very good. And the penultimate act of His creation is the formation of human beings in His image. "Let us make man in our image after our likeness," the text says. "And let them have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the heavens and over the livestock and over all the earth and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." So what the beginning of this story tells us is that the role of human beings as image bearers of God is at its most basic to reflect the image of God within the creation, to represent God within the world that He has made. Human beings do this in a very large way, and one of the most basic ways is through the work of cultivation. This is what it means for us to have dominion. Human beings are to be fruitful and to multiply, to fill the earth and subdue it, all the while realizing that they are creatures of God who are made to enjoy and cultivate God's gifts in relationship with him. Now, an oft-used definition that I've had in mind this whole time is a definition of culture by Ken Myers. And he says, culture is what human beings make of the world. And Andy Crouch has written a wonderful book on this topic called Culture Making, which has become a very big part of how I think about these issues. Human beings as image bearers of God are tasked with the holy responsibility of creating culture, of making something of the world. This is our vocation. Adam and Eve's vocation was to be gardeners in the garden of God, and as gardeners they were creators of culture. Now, for many of us, culture is an ivory tower word. We often hear it in the context of arts and culture, but as this definition states, culture is so much more than that. Culture is what all of us make of the world. We were made to be creators, to cultivate the pockets of creation where we have been placed. And we can do this through music and painting and theater and things like that. But culture, at its most basic, is the meal you offer to friends that lifts their tired spirits when life is tough. Culture is the delicate way you make that latte behind the coffee counter, or the smile you offer to the last table you are serving on the late shift. Culture is how you raise your child, parenting being one of the most creative works of all. Culture is the change effected in the world when one single person is rescued from the sex trade, either here or abroad. Culture is that piece that you've been practicing on the piano for so long and trying to perfect, and that you're waiting for the right moment to reveal. Culture is the way your home feels when people walk in, and what determines their answer to the question, should I stay or should I go? You are a creator because God is the creator, and you are made in his image. And this is why I've been thinking about this, because boredom and busyness are primary ways in which the task of bearing God's image through the work of cultivation is frustrated. And we are not able to do this when these things attack us. And we are plagued and embroiled in these various frustrations because the first twist in the biblical story that I'm talking about, which is the intrusion of a serpent into the Garden of Eden, where Adam and Eve had been placed. So while Adam and Eve were going about doing their work of cultivation in relationship with God, the serpent came and planted two seeds of doubt in their hearts, that God was withholding, and that it was possible to go about their work without relationship to him. And they listened to him. And the world was plunged into darkness and sin after this, because this is not the way the world was made to work. God's gifts enjoyed and cultivated out of relationship with him can easily become curses. And Adam and Eve, in this gorgeous painting that you see, tragic painting, have lost the paradise they were given with their choice to disbelieve God. And the image in God in them and in all of their offspring, that's us, has become marred, as if someone took a knife and slashed it through the canvas of the most beautiful and valuable painting in the whole world. And now every act of culture making done by humans is riddled with frustration and brokenness, either in big ways or in little ways. The big ways are most obvious to us, the dictator who desires to cleanse his country, his culture, of a certain race, and enacts the process of genocide. But the little ways are just as insidious. The eloquent words of a pastor's sermon, written to impress his congregation, rather than turn their eyes toward God. Much of the culture we create on a day-to-day basis in our lives is filled with this kind of selfish ambition, and the image of God that we reflect to the world is often a distorted one. And this is what we find in the biblical story, all throughout the Bible. And as the story moves on, we increasingly realize that this situation is one that we cannot get out of ourselves. And this is why the Bible says that we need a mediator who can help us. And this is Jesus. And the New Testament writers tell us that Jesus is the image of the invisible God. And the wonderful, beautiful thing is that everywhere Jesus goes, there is flourishing life and culture as it was meant to be. Jesus' first miracle is the transformation of water into wine at a party that was losing steam. He gives sight to the blind, restoration. He heals the sick, bringing more restoration, and he even raises the dead. And with the power that he had been given, Jesus was creating culture wherever he went, and this culture was called the kingdom of God. So for us, knowing our problems and our weaknesses and our failures at this task, Jesus lives a life of total perfection that in every way reflects the beauty of God's character. And in his death, Jesus takes to himself all the egregious failures of the human calling and dies to them. Their destructive power destroys him, and the curse of God that humanity's unbelief and disobedience calls down is fully exhausted. Now, after this death, 3 days later, a woman named Mary rises early in the morning to go to the tomb of Jesus, and she finds that the tomb is open. She's distressed and immediately thinks that grave robbers have had their way, and she goes to find some other friends of Jesus, and they go into the tomb to investigate. The body is not there. The friends go home, but Mary continues to stand outside the tomb to investigate. It has been a week filled with grief for Mary, and this incident of the stolen body of her Lord and her Master must have seemed like the cruelest ending that could have been imagined. But suddenly she hears a voice speaking to her through her tears. "Woman, why are you weeping? Who are you seeking?" And the Gospel of John tells us that before she realized that this voice was the risen Jesus, she thought it was the gardener. Now the vocation of Adam, the first human being, was to be a gardener, to create culture by tending the earth and offering it to God as a sacrifice of thanksgiving. And Adam failed in this task, and we fail day by day because we share in his failure. But after bearing the weight of all of Adam's failings, Jesus rose from the dead, and it's so funny to me and to many scholars who have noticed this, he's mistaken for, of all things, a gardener. And this is because Jesus is the true gardener who tends and cares for his creation and all those who trust in him, and causes this effaced image of God in us to become as perfect as his. And the Bible tells us that those who are in Christ are in the process of being transformed into what Jesus is. And this is from one degree of glory to another. Jesus restores human beings to their original creative calling. Now, culture is made up of the various marks that human beings leave on the world. And when these various marks are made as offerings of thanksgiving to God, the world is a glorious place. And for someone who believes in Jesus, life is nothing more than this. It is every single thing we make and do being offered up to God as an offering of thanksgiving. And when we do this, our cultural work becomes a foretaste of this kingdom of God that will come completely one day, and which Christians around the world pray that will begin coming now on earth as it is in heaven. So in the power of God's grace, in Jesus' power, we are tasked with bringing a little bit of heaven to earth. So, big stuff here. And often hard to put yourself into this in this story, in the grind of day-to-day life. But on my better days, retelling myself this story is the best cure for the temptation to mindless boredom and exhausting overcommitment. And it inspires me to reach out of myself and toward others in an attempt to do justice and honor to my calling as an image bearer of God. Because you have to be somebody before you can share yourself. So the good news of the Christian story is that no matter who you are somebody. You are an image bearer of God. And the bad news is that no matter who you are, that image has been effaced and is likely being effaced by boredom and busyness and so many other things that we struggle with in life. And the good news again is that Jesus comes to restore this image, enabling all who trust in him to return to their original creative calling with joy and become people who are free to give themselves away to others creatively and freely as part of a kingdom that the Bible tells us cannot be shaken. So this is a grand picture, and it's real big. But it starts out small. And the Bible tells us that the kingdom of God starts out like the seed that is planted in the ground, a very small seed, and it eventually grows into a bush that is bigger than all the other bushes, and the birds come and find a home in its branches. But it has to start small. So in conclusion, I'd like to think of Jaron Lanier. I don't know if he's a Christian, but his life is not all surrounded by the technology that he has invented. He has a career as a writer now, sure, but also he has a whole collection of instruments, and these are old instruments from ancient cultures, and he knows how to play all of them, and he creates beautiful music, and this is the culture he creates in his home along with his daughter. But an example that I think of even more in conclusion, this November I had the opportunity to host 3 wonderful friends for Thanksgiving at my home. And they had come a long distance to visit me. And one of my visitors is named Kelly. And he is one of the most talented people that I know. He is a photographer and a videographer and video editor, and he recently returned from doing shoots in Hawaii and at Yosemite State Park. And it's wonderful to have him around because you're bound to have beautiful documentation of any adventures you have with him, which is really fun. But I noticed that he recently downgraded to a dumb phone, and that he doesn't check his email nearly as much as I do, when he has much more to worry about than I do, or many more people who are in demand of him in his life. So I asked him about this, and he gave me a great answer in an email. That's him. And he said, "As if I don't have enough trouble unplugging at work, then taking a laptop and iPhone home with me, that's just craziness. Letting the blue light of death cover me. Constant access to whoever is a bad thing, don't care who you are. Information for the sake of information, like there's no reason for me to text you except for the fact that I can text you. What would be different if I couldn't access people, communicate with people all the time? That's why it's great to leave my computer at work, to not check email after I leave if it's past 5 or the weekend. Don't ever expect me to reply to a work email, and I usually never look at my email over the weekend. Hallelujah. Not having a smartphone lets you be with yourself. In the elevator, standing in line, driving, walking down the street, in an airport, on the bus. You don't have a device to pull out to distract yourself with, play games, surf the web, whatever. It's nice to just be. And what's awesome is that when I got rid of my phone for a bit, I didn't even notice those moments when I didn't have it. I continued on with life and missed those group texts and picture messages and other stuff that my dumb phone couldn't get, and went on with my life without them." So this is not a prescription for all people, but this is what Kelly did, and it helped him a lot. And it might seem rather basic, but I know something about Kelly that you don't know. At least once a month, in my mailbox, I receive a postcard from Kelly. And this is not because he's traveling necessarily, but because this is the way he has chosen to cultivate his friendships. He has cultivated a gift for spontaneous writing that makes those who receive his cards feel loved and appreciated. And what is he doing in those moments when boredom hits him? He's picking up a pen and writing a postcard to me and to many other friends around the world. And they often go something like this. "A beautiful chilly morning, sitting on the front porch of the Deep End," that's his house, "reading by candlelight, drinking coffee from a Tampa, Florida Franciscan Center mug, and just enjoying the crispness of the air and the sounds of the city. It takes a certain kind of mood, but I feel as though I could sit here for hours and suck it all in. The jackhammers off in the distance, the last drops falling on our gutters, the heavy pinkish blue sky, something leaf trees. Thank you, Jesus, for this day. And you, thank you so much for your response to my questions and openness to the wonder that God has placed around you. I'm very grateful, and I'm so pumped that it opened up for a Thanksgiving visit." And receiving one of these twice monthly, is just a highlight of my life. and knowing that this is how Kelly has chosen to cultivate the relationships and make culture around him is a wonderful thing. So Kelly is bearing the image of God and creating culture all around him in his day-to-day job of video production. And in much of his off time through what I can only call a worldwide postcard ministry of encouragement. So how might we do the same in the coming year? And that's the question I want to leave you with. So that's all I have.